An interesting question in the halacha is about the obligation of women to hear the Megillah, to read the Megillah, to being able to participate in doing the mitzvah of Kriyat Megillah for others, and who might these others be? Well, I'm not going to get into the full range of the discussion. I would like to make several points that the Shulchan Aruch emphasizes. Tav Reish Pei Tet, the Shulchan Aruch says, Hakol chayavim b'kriyata. Everybody who is obliged, of course, to do a mitzvah, to do any mitzvah, is obliged to do this mitzvah. And then the Shulchan Aruch says that includes anashim v'nashim. Women are obliged, just as men are obliged, to do the mitzvah of Kriyat HaMegillah. And the Mishnah Berurah says, After Kriyahu davar shazman grama, even though Kriyat HaMegillah falls into the category of time-bound mitzvot, and we all know that women are not obliged to do time-bound mitzvot. It's true that they can do those mitzvot, generally speaking. There are certain problems, but generally speaking, they can do the time-bound mitzvot if they wish, and then they get schar for doing the mitzvah. In this case, the Mishnah Berurah is referring to the statement in the Shulchan Aruch which obligates women to hear Kriyat HaMegillah and does not say that they have the option to do the mitzvah of Kriyat HaMegillah. And the Mishnah Berurah quotes the answer given in the Gemara, explained by the other Rishonim, by Tosfot in several places in Shas, Sha'af hein hayu ba'oto hanes, that they were included, women were included. Those of you who remember the story know that Esther HaMalka, Queen Esther, played a very important role, and therefore all the women are included. The Mishnah Berurah explains further that at the beginning, the Gzeirah, the edict that Haman carried, promulgated, was also against the women, as the psukim indicate. And then he says, the Mishnah Berurah goes on and makes a statement of a sociological nature. He says, "Lachein tzarich ha'ish likrota beveito." Therefore, it's important that every man take upon himself the obligation to read the Megillah at home, so that the young girls, right, his daughters, the mishartot, the servant girls who are Jewish, will also be able to participate in the mitzvah. In other words, according to the Mishnah Berurah, it's unlikely that these women, girls, servant girls, would be able to go to shul to hear the Megillah. And he says, nevertheless, it is true that in certain places, certain cities, certain places, certain women do go to shul to hear Kriyat HaMegillah. They go to the Ezrat Nashim, and they listen to the Kriyat Megillah. The Mishnah Berurah doesn't like this, but listen carefully to his rationale. He says, Achein tzarich iyun. We should look carefully into this custom of going to shul to hear the Megillah. Why? Because he says, Eich yotzim sham nashim. How can we say that the women fulfill their obligation? De'i efshar lishmoa sham kidin. We know that the obligation to hear the reading of the Megillah is an obligation that devolves upon every single word in the Megillah. And therefore, when somebody reads the Megillah out loud and he's reading it for me, I have to be able to hear every word. There is a minhag that the Jews have adopted, that you buy a kosher Megillah, you follow it as the Shaliach Tzibur, as the reader reads, and sometimes if you can't hear what he's saying, you could fill in by reading it yourself from the Megillah that you have. The Mishnah Berurah seems to think that this problem is significant enough for the men sitting in the men's section near the reader. But for women who might be sitting in a balcony or certainly are sitting behind the mechitza, this becomes almost impossible. I mean, how can you possibly hear, with all the noise that's going on, how could you possibly hear what the reader of the Megillah is reading? And so we know that both of these two customs have developed. One is that even though the Shulchan Aruch mentions the fact that our minhag is to make noise whenever the name Haman appears in the Megillah, we understand that making noise, while it's like a great thing to do, is counter-indicated from the point of view of Hilchot Kriyat HaMegillah, because it endangers the flow. It's very hard for the Shaliach Tzibur, for the reader, to be able to gauge exactly when the noise level has subsided sufficiently to let his reading be heard by everybody in the room. So that's one problem. Because of that, there are many shuls today which severely limit, they ration the Hamans that you can make noise at. In the yeshiva, all the years that I was in the yeshiva, we had the minhag of making noise on the first Haman and then the last Haman in the book of Esther, and patiently listening to Kriyat HaMegillah in between. For the women, the Mishnah Berurah says, it's inconceivable that they could hear every word of the Megillah, since they're sitting either far away or in a balcony, and therefore the Mishnah Berurah says, better to accomplish this mitzvah, to go to a place where there's a small group of people at home, where the father, older brother, reads the Megillah for the women. With this introduction, we'll be able to review several of the other halachot that refer to women and Kriyat HaMegillah.